Alrighty, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today I am back with my wonderful co-host, PL Stuart, for Page Chewing. And we have, well, every episode is exciting, but today's particularly exciting because we have Tim Hickson, also known as Hello Future Me, with us today. I like to call him a world-building aficionado, but this is not a label that he put on himself. It's one that I put on you because you, in my opinion, your world-building analysis has always consistently intrigued me. So I would love to, if someone lives under a rock, pass it over to you just to tell people who you are, what you do in the YouTube space. Tell us a little bit about you.
So I am largely known as Hello Future Me online. My real life name is Tim. I kind of have two sides to me, which is that on the one hand, I'm an author. I like writing fiction, particularly sci-fi and fantasy. And I publish fiction magazines, that sort of stuff. I work on board games and TTRPGs. That's a whole other side of my career, which isn't necessarily as visible. But then I also am a YouTuber, and I've been doing that for about 8 years now. And I make educational content where I talk about writing and world building with an edge towards sci-fi and fantasy, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do so much that when we were planning to have you on, I was like, where do we even start, right? Because this man does so much with his time. I don't know how you do it.
I don't know how I do it. I feel like I'm falling apart at all the seams. So,
we do what we can. We do what we can. I sympathize with that feeling. But what I think I'd like to do is kind of start from the author angle. So you mentioned that you do some TTRPG, some kind of more behind the scenes stuff, but you also are just an upfront and visible author, right? So you have your world building series of books, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, but your most recent one was Catalogue for the End of Humanity. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So that's a collection of short stories, which sort of took a bunch of the stuff that I'd published professionally and then mixed it with a bunch of stuff which I hadn't yet published, or kind of like with just some more personal works, put them all together with a bunch of short stories, and then also like a novelette called Trickle Down Lobotomies, which is a title I just love. I remember when that title came to me and I was like, I need to use that. That's done really well. I'm really happy with how it's going, and I'm very fortunate to be able to be in a position where I can sort of do that in the first place. It's something I'm always thinking about with my job, is that I am so fortunate to even be in the position that I am in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I did pick up Catalogue for the End of Humanity. I haven't finished it yet, full disclaimer, but I have read a good portion of it. And it's a collection of short stories, and I have fallen in love with short fiction in the past 2 years. I don't know what it is. It just
me too. Yeah.
Got its hooks in me, and it has not released me. Obviously, I like a thick boy. You can see behind me, but there's something about short fiction recently that's just been working. And in my opinion, from what I've read so far, Catalogue seems to be kind of a love story to short fiction, even the way you talk about it on your channel, and or love letter to it. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what's the particular magic that short fiction holds?
Oh, so I mean, there's the beautiful thing about short fiction is, to some extent, just purely practical. It's like logistical. It sounds really cold and raw to describe it that way, but there are infinite stories that we can get involved with, and I could never read all the stories that I wanted to read that I in my life, even with my 80-90 years that I might have on this planet. And so short fiction sort of gives you the opportunity to expose yourself to as many different concepts and authors and styles and risk-taking stories as you could possibly imagine. Especially for me, where reading a lot is kind of part of the job. I have to keep reading. Short fiction lets me do that at a faster pace. Again, it's like logistical, but it's also that you get to fall more in love with the craft of reading because of the breadth and exposure to which, short fiction can sort of give you. You can read you can read like a really bizarre kind of South Korean horror story about a woman who has like a head that's popping up out of her toilet, and then like the next part you can read A Dream of Electric Mothers by Walter Laby, which is about the civilization that has an AI kind of built out of the memories of the past generations to kind of be like the collective wisdom of humanity. And like, because the short nature of it, you can just you can interface with so much more of storytelling and of, in a way, kind of humanity, and also what you think you might like, and in that sort of discover what you want to write and read. And so for that has been a transformative thing for me.
Yeah, I resonate with so many of the things that you just mentioned. Pete Jelly Clark is actually the one that made me fall in love with short fiction, if I have to trace it down to someone, because I read Master of Jin first, and while I do love that book, the novellas in that world, just, there is no word wasted, and the skill to build a world that makes me want more. It's liminal at the edges, and that's the beauty of it, right? And I think when you speak about having a collection of short stories as well, that ability, that flexible aspect of them makes them kind of coalesce together in a collection, a well put together collection, in a way that a larger book doesn't. So I really resonate with a lot of what you said. Yeah,
no, very much so. I mean, like, it's really interesting to sort of see, to sort of like understand a writer's vision and craft through like a collection of stories, which might be very disparate and different to each other, compared to like a long series where you get kind of like this, a lot more, longer breakdown, but within the same kind of universe. It's sort of a different way of sort of approaching your understanding of a person and their storytelling.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We are on the same page when it comes to short fiction. I wanted to pull up a couple comments here, which was here. I think I get what you mean, though. Short stories are storytelling distilled. They have to be thematic. I think it continues as well, and they feel cohesive because everything sums to the same conceptual message. I think that's true of some anthologies. Like the Paper Menagerie, I think you could argue has an underlying baseline of a concept that it's kind of working with, history, lineage, connection to those things.
There are definitely consistent themes of kind of like a cultural identity being that comes up again and again in Kin Liu's stories.
Yeah. So I think that is true in some cases, but you can look at it from so many different angles, as you mentioned, Tim. So I think PL wanted to jump in there. Let me pass it over.
No, just quickly agreeing, and also saying that I think it was some of my favorite indie anthologies, and some of them I haven't read, but I've read some of the individual stories, the short stories from the authors. The Anatomy of Fear. So various authors, common theme, fear, essentially. So it's a horror anthology. Alchemy of Sorrow, grief, is the central theme. So that's all these stories are linked. So all these authors have written about the central theme, but the stories are so unique and so different. It just really gives you that like texturally, like the texture is just so wonderful, and it flows from one person's unique style of writing to the others, but you're still dealing with the same central theme, and I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
I really love that kind of just the way that those stories work together.
I think that's great. Yeah, there's an art to it, putting them together. Before we move on, because I have some questions about Catalogue specifically and some themes you were working with. Speaking of, I'd just like to pull up a couple comments. We got a lot of people here. I can't believe I'm going to miss this entire stream because I'm about to go watch the Minecraft movie.
I mean, it's going to be a classic, right? Like, I mean, it's got to be. I have to assume it's going to be fantastic.
If it's more important than this, it better be. So we've got a bunch of hellos. We got friends of the channel. Hi, Philip. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Hey, Philip.
Yes.
Awesome, Philip Chase.
And I wanted to pop this up from Adam, also has been on the channel, fantastic human. Tim casually handed us 2 robots, and we don't talk enough about how devastating that story is. When I picked up Catalogue, I'm upset with you, Tim, because I was like, it's going to be, short fiction. I'll read a couple. Tell me why I was crying on the couch. And my husband looks at me, he's like, this is very sudden. What happened? I'm like, I want to talk about it.
I had this idea came to me. I was like, I've always had a love for like androids with souls. Like that is like a trope which I just tend to enjoy. I love stories about like created beings becoming human, or like, you know, wanting to express their humanity. They're trying to be seen as human, in large part because a lot of these stories, a lot of the time, well, they can go either way, but a lot of these stories are about how wonderful humanity is. And I have found myself more and more along the lines of kind of like feeling the wonder and specialness of humanity. Because I know that there's like a lot of the time it's kind of like, no, humanity's terrible and awful. But I have found myself enjoying stories which at least kind of like look up to humanity and go, no, we're actually pretty remarkable. We have our, bad traits as well, but we are remarkable. And that story is in some sense about that. But I had this fantastic idea for me, like a visceral idea for me, where I was like, okay, what if a robot thought of a dictionary as a religious text to understand humanity? And that was kind of where it came from. And so when I was going through it and as the story, and I was kind of coming up with this tension, I wanted to find something which the sort of mistake a robot might make if they were interpreting, a term in the dictionary, which was how they would mix up the term gun and trumpet. Yeah. Both these objects that people hold that make a loud noise, that they have at parades potentially, and sort of playing on that misconception of humanity, because he fundamentally, I think, believes it's a trumpet primarily because he believes humanity is amazing and like trumpets are cool and musical and stuff like that. He doesn't necessarily think that much about a gun, because why would it? Humans have guns and so on. But the story is fundamentally about that, like perception of humanity, both how wonderful we are and terrible we are.
Yeah. Well, you've just handed me the perfect segue for the main theme that I wanted to talk about with your books. And you're on the internet talking to other people about, or on your own channel, about the fact that death is a repetitive theme, right, in your stories. Yes. And you like to talk about it, grapple with it, right? But something that I noticed from the stories that I've read that stuck out to me as unique in the way that you handle it, in my perspective, is as humans, we tend to look at the before and we tend to look at the after, but we shy away from the moment. And I felt like almost all of your stories really focused on the moment of the disappearance or the death, whether it be a story, a person, a world, whatever is dying. And that stuck out to me, that you're not afraid to sit there with that moment. So I'm wondering if that's conscious, if there's something else going on, if that's... What are your thoughts on that observation?
I think to some extent, when we're storytelling, people talk about like you start the story where it's the most interesting point. But I think we're also, do you want to be looking for the point where there are the most complex emotions? And I think I am potentially kind of drawn to those individual moments of demise, especially because they're kind of like, death is like the only point in your life which when there is a death around you, it's the death of a family member, it's the death of a friend, it's the death of a pet, where you kind of like draw lines of like sort of before and after, and I think that is really difficult because we imagine ourselves in part through the people that we are around. And when you lose the people that are around you, you lose a way to imagine yourself. And I think the transition from kind of like that point to becoming the new person, separated from that other person, is a really interesting psychological place to put characters. I think that's probably where I tend to think about it the most.
So it's kind of the crux of the emotions that you want to explore, that particular moment. Is that a fair paraphrase as to why?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of those stories, that moment is very emotionally wrought in all of them. So, forgive me, I can't recall the name of the one that I'm thinking of right now, but the one with the Jupiter moon story, that just left me with a crushing feeling.
Yeah.
Right? Is that the Hate in 5 Parts? Is that the one?
No. Hate in 5 Parts, The Funeralist, is the one about the kind of like, it's like a tooth fairy.
The Tooth Fairy, yeah.
That's probably my favorite story in the collection, and that is about that's honestly in a way more about our relationship to fiction, although it is also clearly about death in the sense, because it's very much about endings. It's about humanity's end, like you see at the end of the story, like the end of humanity. Although there is, if you read the footnotes, you'll know that there is, of course, in the text, it's implied that there is some other universe that has continued on after this, and that's because I've always liked the idea that stories are in part powerful because they're parts of us that continue on beyond us. There's when you think about like how humanity has survived and what we pass on from generation to generation, we fundamentally pass on stories. And those stories take different forms as traditions and mythologies and, ways of thinking and believing. But they are stories that we tell ourselves and about the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've waxed poetic about that on this channel many times. The fact that stories are just how we connect. They are essential to who we are as a species, And I think no matter how we choose to evolve, or not choose, but how we end up evolving, I can't imagine that fundamental thing changing.
There's a really interesting book about this called The Sense of an Ending, where it's a book about basically this guy starts to realize that he has imagined his past and his past actions very differently to how they truly are. He's hurt people. And there's all these great lines about how, like, humans are fundamentally tell a story about themselves to themselves. Like, we exist as a story, and so we tend to edit that. We speed parts of it up, we minimize other parts of it. We can sometimes edit them out if it's really bad, And I think that's just an interesting concept,
I think I had a discussion with a fellow writer, and we said that arguably death is the defining moment by which we can identify essentially almost any person, any famous person, any infamous person, any historical character. If we know nothing else about their life, we know how they died. And that's a very odd thing if you think about it. Whether it's someone like Henry V dying of dysentery, after this great military career, whether it is Jesus Christ being crucified, whether it is, it's so odd that is always, if you look at someone's biography and if you ask the average person, you will know how they died. And that's odd.
We have no idea what they did for the first 40 years of their life, but in the end, they tripped on a piece of ice and died down some chasm,
Bless them. That's all that we know for.
Exactly. So that says something about us and how we actually perceive endings and the significance and the relevance, I think, of endings.
No, very much so.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is what we will remember about you. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, depends on your life. So just kind of a little bit of a callback to earlier, you mentioned you've always loved the idea of like a sentient or soulful robot, or something to that effect. So. And also in the interview you did with Brandon Sanderson, and I quote, you said, "The sci-fi with the intimate is something that has always fascinated you." And I feel that kind of reflects back on what you said about liking the robots. So what is it about the juxtaposition of some form of intimacy, whether it's a soul, whatever that intimacy you're exploring is, with something sci-fi-esque? What do you think?
Okay, so it's when I said that it's that what I was talking about, there was like sci-fi with intimacy. It's like you look at like Story of Your Life or Arrival, where you've got this big first contact. Like, not only is it like first contact is a big concept, but like you've got these like big aliens, big ships, big, condensed, complicated like ideas of language and you know, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And that's set against basically the loss of a child and the breakdown of a relationship. And the short story and the film are a little bit different, like in really interesting ways. But for me, I think that stories which kind of like have these kind of like really big ideas, big concepts, but they're very much wrapped up in a deeply personal experience. It's almost like you get to dramatize the really personal experience in a way which is particularly visceral, especially because a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, the strength of sci-fi and fantasy is often in metaphor. You know, it's often in the ability to literalize certain things about the human experience. And that's what I tend to like, you know. So when I think about, I tend to be less interested in a big battle between hordes of spaceships, you know, shooting lasers at each other, than I am at you know, a parallel between the arrival of your firstborn child and the creation of a, you know, new kind of clone life or like AI entity. It's yeah, so I think that tends to be where I sort of land on that.
So the not necessarily the juxtaposition, but the fact that those two things can exist together in a cohesive way, right? So the bombastic, large scale things can also can simultaneously exist as something, you know, that we can.
Yeah, I think you've got to reimagine the big things as small things. Just as much as you reimagine the small things as big things.
Yeah, it goes both ways. Okay, I wanted to pull up a couple questions here just before we move on, because I thought some of them were very insightful. One that is not insightful but did make me chuckle was this one. Please read this comment as well. I have read your comment.
You can't give in to them. You can't give in to them. You're going to get yourself a slew of comments now.
I've given one. That's it. Your one gimme. And then the other one I wanted to pull up was about grief down here. Just give me one moment to pull that one up. It has escaped me. Come back. Here we go.
I am reading the comments.
Yeah. There's some good stuff in here. But one thing you have to realize is that people must carry grief over a lot of things in life. Even nostalgia can be viewed as a different form of grief, which I thought was just very insightful.
I agree. Actually, one of my recent videos kind of touched on this idea that not specifically grief, but reframing like nostalgia as like a you know, it's this desire to hold on to a past which is no longer around. You know, it's because you look around and maybe you feel isolated from the present, so you grieve for the past.
Yeah, 100%. And there was one other one. Well, I can come back to that later. So what we'll do is I have a different kind of type of question, kind of coming out from the nitty-gritty, the idea of the themes and the underlying things that you work with. I wanted to talk more about the visual aspect of Catalogue specifically. Something that you mentioned when you talk about it is how excited you were to work with artists to bring these stories to life. Specifically artists that are real humans and preferably in the community, right? So it's kind of a two-part question. The first one is, why were you so intent on bringing your stories to life via art? And the second would be, for those who doubt, because unfortunately there's enough of them, probably not in this stream, but you never know, why is it important to you to engage human artists? What do they have that AI and other things do not, right? So it's kind of a two-part question there.
If it was purely a question of like, what do human artists have that AI doesn't, I think that's an ultimately losing battle way to view AI versus human art, because
Okay.
AI is a technology, and technology is going to get better. And it in many ways it is already going to be indistinguishable from human work. I think that's just kind of a cold hard fact, and I think that it's probably it's probably a losing battle. There are going to be some exceptions to that, obviously. And AI is not going to be super well equipped to do art which is going to be pushing the bounds of anything anyone's ever seen before, because it's obviously going to be trained on stuff which already exists. But humans do bring vision to the process. I don't believe AI. I mean, AI doesn't have vision. AI has collective number generators which turn out something that vaguely resembles keywords that you've given it, for the most part. But the main thing is that I like working with people. I think that for me, there's a really precious experience. I love giving someone like the story, because I gave the artist the story. I said, can you read the story and tell me what you imagine? And that's because for a large part of me, I get a lot out of an artist being able to read my work and then have their vision come out of that, to see what their interpretation of it is. And AI doesn't do that. It doesn't think, it doesn't feel. It has no vision of its own. It is not a human with experience. And so in that sense, it doesn't. Its expression doesn't mean anything to them. Its expression doesn't really represent any personal interpretation of the work. And I think that's really important for me. And I don't want to live in a world where human art is sidelined for the most part. And I don't know how realistic that aim is necessarily, because fundamentally, if it is cheaper and easier, then it's going to be popular, but I think that if you gave most humans the opportunity, a significant portion of them would be writers and artists and singers and people who express themselves creatively. And I think that in a perfect world, that is what a significant portion of humans would be doing. And I think that it's good for us to be exchanging ideas in that way. And I think that handing over that role to AI is kind of incredibly demoralizing.
Yeah.
I guess potentially though, Tim, with society changing, with us evolving, with things like the advent of AI, could we reach a point where ultimately all of our technological advances allow us to get to this, I don't want to say utopian society where humans have the opportunity, because they don't have to devote themselves to other endeavors, they don't have to work to make money potentially and earn a living and support themselves the same way that we could have more artists, more people focusing on expressing themselves and becoming artists and writers and painters? And
are you saying, like, is theoretically AI and a way towards allowing people to be more that way?
Yes, more creative and more.
Broadly, there we're getting into the discussion of automation. We're getting into the discussion of an automated economy and industry. So there's a book series called like E&M Banks, which is fundamentally a world where all food production, energy production, all kinds of production that you could possibly need have been automated, run by AIs, funnily enough. And I mean, even government has been automated because it's just easier for them to manage everything. And humans can do anything. If you want to have your own planet and never see another human, you can. It's a really fascinating series. Some people are going to say that that's only going to be possible when we have a lack of resource scarcity, when we're post scarcity, when we have infinite power, infinite clean energy, infinite power, infinite resources. Then theoretically, automating every industry and letting everyone do anything they want. Like, that's a utopian vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is that going to happen? I mean, it's not at the moment,
Right.
You're sort of projecting forward into kind of like, oh, we need fission energy, and we need, water from the asteroid belts, and we need, vastly more complicated machines and AI, universal basic income. There are all sorts of, I mean, not even to mention that this is a very first world way of viewing the things. We live in a world where a huge amount of the human population lives in a very different economic circumstance than much of the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, even within society, AI is, broadly speaking, concentrating more and more creative capital and power in the hands of companies, which is already already very powerful. And that is in part that I mean, yeah. So, I mean, like, it's a very complicated topic on which I have a lot of opinions. I could spend
You've
hours
pontificated
talking.
quite a few.
I'm sure I've pontificated. It's a utopian dream, and at the moment, still a dream. But look, I mean, if we're projecting into the far future and we're going, hey, let's automate everything, then sure, maybe that is a world in which people can all be artists that they want to be. But we don't live in that world just yet. And there's a lot of work to even set the foundations towards being able to automate the amount of stuff that we would need to automate.
So even if that is a possible hope for the future, or something we can look towards, dealing with the now, you are making the choice to make sure that you employ and work with, right, people within your sphere in order to keep human art at the forefront. And I do know a lot of people in this space who also are making a huge effort for that. In the self-published world, there's a whole lot of things shifting in order to hopefully safeguard that space, right?
Hopefully. Fun story about this, by the way. I reached out to an artist that I really like. And basically, when I sent out the contracts, I said, one of the stipulations is you can't use AI. I need access to your base files to be able to go through them, because there are some interesting tidbits that you can tell when AI is being used. And one person replied, not even kidding, like, this is a paid good gig, and someone came back and was like, you wouldn't know if I used AI. And I'm like, why would, I mean, even if you wanted to, why would you say that to me?
Because now
now I'm not gonna do it. Now it's so I couldn't
Wow. Well, they shot themselves in the foot, so you had nothing to do with that.
And I did have to get a couple of pieces redone because I started to suspect one person was using AI, but the vast majority were not. Sorry, to be clear, none of the pieces that ended up in the book were AI. I want to be very clear here. But in the process of me finding the artists and going through things, there were hurdles along the way.
A couple things, yeah. I can speak from a slightly different perspective, but kind of the same issue, which is myself and PL in the past for several years has been SPIFPO judges for the self-published fantasy blog off competition.
Yes.
And there's been, when I tell you, this is a volunteer thing. We all volunteer to read these books. And the amount of trying to slip AI books through, the amount of people who used AI covers and tried to pretend that it wasn't, it's very obvious. There was even a situation of someone, bless him, who found out post that there was AI in his cover because people pointed out to him, and got ghosted by the artist and just decided, in order to protect that space, like I mentioned, kind of safeguard it, got another artist and redid his cover. But it's really caused some issues because it's all volunteer and everyone's like, ain't nobody got time for this.
I think we're only seeing the tip of it. I mean, like AI YouTube videos. I've seen AI YouTube videos, AI voice, AI audio, AI scripts, AI everything they are coming out fast. I think if we're projecting 10 years into the future, we're going to be seeing a vastly different internet landscape where, you know, people are creating basically AIs which manufacture whole industry level amounts of content, and people own the AIs. They don't own the channels. Like it is different. There's a comment there which says, I've thoroughly enjoyed going through the process of creating art with my artists, piece by piece breakdowns. It's genuinely exhilarating. That is very much how I feel. For me, that is such an important part of the process, and I will always, as long as I can afford to do that, I want to be able to do that. Not that I would use AI art, you know, if I couldn't, but you know, I'm lucky enough to be in the position where I can afford to hire artists at the moment, which is why I've brought one on for the channel recently.
I've had so many interesting discussions with authors, specifically about the self-published fantasy industry versus traditional publishing. And a lot of the theories, and I don't want to say conspiracy theories, I don't want to say, there's some legitimate reasons for the thought process behind this, that eventually traditional publishers will, I mean, they're certainly promoting AI covers, but that they will essentially get to the point where AI authors make the most sense for their business model for you know, profit.
Well, we're already seeing Amazon offering AI audiobooks. And so you can go into there and just be like, can you make my book into an audiobook? And I think that a lot of people are going to be taking that up. And when you look, by the way, I'm still like part of I'm still a part of like a bunch of like creative writing Facebook groups. People post in there all the time their clearly AI generated covers and writing. You know, there are whole programs out there which are designed to help you. Well, I don't want to say help you, but to generate your writing for you. The industry is going to react to that, and the idea that like the people currently in control of the industry don't like it, that will not hold AI books at the dam forever.
Yeah, I think the meaning of media literacy is going to change drastically. It already has changed drastically, what you need to be able to navigate that space. But I would like to end the conversation here on like a slightly positive point, which is, you know, the small acts that I see you doing and other people doing does give me hope that at least there are like-minded people who want to safeguard the space as much as possible. And it makes you feel less alone, you know, when you're kind of faced with the future that's coming up. So I just wanted to say that it means a lot to me when I see you openly saying that, having had experiences kind of wading through that space. So thank you for your effort and for putting that out there on your platform. It means a lot to see.
Feels like the bare minimum, but you know, well, doing what I can, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, to pull back a little bit more towards kind of your work and what the content that you create, a bridge kind of between your author work and your YouTube work is the through line of world building, right? So I mentioned at the beginning, I've given you the unrequested title of Worldbuilding Aficionado because I think a lot of people come to you for that kind of advice. And one thing that I've found interesting that I've heard you say, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but while you talk about world building a lot, and that's kind of the core of a lot of your content, you don't necessarily enjoy that as a core part of your writing.
It's actually funny because this is actually only something I've ever said in person. I have never said that publicly. So you've
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it's I need to qualify this.
Okay.
I tend to find that world building for me is an interesting exercise in isolation. I find it really interesting to look at stories and to understand how and why the world works in the same way that I like to understand what were the causes of, you know, the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire? You know, I find that a fascinating thing, and I especially love how the world building of fictional worlds often mimics our own, comments on our own, can sometimes betray a view of the world. But the thing is that when I write, I tend to be very theme focused. I tend to be very ideas first, character first. And so people sometimes assume to me, like, they'll ask me, like, do you get world builder's disease where you just can't stop world building before you start writing? And I'm like, no, because for me, the world building is entirely secondary to my writing for the most part. They are you know, they are really interesting together. But for me, especially because, like, I haven't written no, but yeah, I mean, those are two different things which I approach differently, I suppose, even though I love both of them.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that you secretly hate it, like you're you know, that you hate what you're known for. I think it's one of those things that even if it's not your priority when you're writing your own work, it doesn't mean the knowledge goes away, right? It means that knowledge and you knowing how to make these pieces all work together, how to make the cogs fit, how to make something cohesive in the background, that doesn't mean that's still not there, even if it's not your where you start from, right? So I just think it's interesting that there's a difference in primary focus depending on the type of work that you're doing. But I didn't know that that was an in-person comment you had made.
No. It's just it's fine. I can see the AI chat is continuing on. There's so many interesting like angles. We can go down that path if you want, but because I have really complicated opinions on it, especially if you get into the political side. But you know,
I'm seeing the AI popping off here, and I think what we'll do is, I know PL and I have a couple things we wanted to talk to you about, more focused on
let's continue with those.
But if we have time at the end, depending on how we're going, don't worry, we're seeing your comments, everyone. Okay, so I'm not just ignoring you. You have some good thoughts out there. All right, so that was kind of the world building. I talked about that as a through line, right, towards between your writing and what you do in the YouTube space. So I would be remiss if I don't mention the two main things that probably people always mention to you is Lord of the Rings and Avatar, right? So those are two things that people probably find you for on your channel first, right?
Yeah.
That's how I found you.
Well,
Lord of the Rings.
I've been doing the occasional Lord of the Ring video for years. You know, there's probably still some stragglers from the How to Train Your Dragon days, but not so much anymore. You know.
I don't know if Philip Chase is still with us, but as a Tolkien scholar, I'm sure he has a lot to say about or would have a lot to say about some of the amazing stuff you've done on Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. He's our local professor, we like to say, in our corner of BookTube. But
he's fantastic. I'm sure there are so many people who know Tolkien's work so much better than I do.
There's almost like a bingo card. It's like, okay, he's going to mention Beowulf and he's going to mention Lord of the Rings, and we love him for it. Funny thing is, when I approached you at Glasgow, I remember I said, it was kind of like a Mean Girls moment. I'm like, oh my God, I love your work about Avatar. And you're like, which one? And when I tell you, I choked because they're all like the same in my head. I was like, all of them? I don't know. But the true answer to that is the one that first, brought me to your channel was your analysis, your hatred of course, the adaptation of universally hated. And delightful. It's so great to hear someone hate something as much as you do, right? So but one of the things that stuck out to me from that particular video, and why from then on you had a subscriber in me, is when you talked about the difference between Katara and Sokka's introduction, right? So you talked about how character work, exposition, all of these things, you see the relationships between the characters, you see the characters having their own personalities, and you understand the world all in a couple lines. And then you showed how that's not in the movie, right?
Yeah.
So that was an aha moment for me where I was like, things clicked. I'm like, oh, that's why it's good, you know? So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm wondering for you, we can get more into that movie part or that video particularly if you would like, but
That's all right.
yeah, we've talked about it enough, I'm sure. But was there a particular aha moment for you as well where you're like, it clicked and you're like, ah, that's why this works, right? And it got you interested in world building. Did you have a moment like that, or was it a slow, steady process?
When you say it works, what is the it here?
It meaning because of these underlying skill sets or these underlying things at play, the story now works. It's smooth. It these cogs match, right? So for me, it was actually that part of your video, and I can't unhear that knowledge now. And I see that.
Are you talking specifically about the show Avatar? Like, what?
No, just in general. Did you have
in general?
Yeah,
like a moment where I was like, okay, this is what good storytelling is.
Yes. You just worded it very well. Thank you for doing my job. But yes.
No, I mean, no. There's no specific moment because, you know, I have always resisted and I've always kind of resented the idea of like writing rules. You know, like at best, what you get to when you talk about writing advice online, at least in my experience, is you get to here's what people tend to enjoy if you're looking to publish largely mainstream fiction. Like that's basically as far as you can go. You know, because like there are so many, you know, you read Piranesi or something like that by Susanna Clarke, and you're like, what writing rules does what does it follow? It's like a meandering character for most of the story. There are
and yet it lives in my bones now, you know.
But it lives in your bones, exactly. I think for me, like when I look at a story and like, is it good? I tend to have two levels to it. Like, is it craftingly good on a craft level where like, oh, you know, it's well paced and it's got good dialogue that's natural and non-contradictory and stuff like that. But I think for me, more meaningfully is, does the story mean something? And does the story stick with us through how it's crafted? That sort of tends to be where I go with it more. It's a bit complicated to explain, like what makes a good story. You know, it's because it's never just one thing, and the writing craft is constantly changing. So yeah, I'm afraid I can't give a concrete answer to that one.
No, that's an answer in and of itself. So
you know, and it's funny how, and I don't want to digress too much from, I know where Avatar was. One of the things that drew me to you was one of my favorite authors and favorite series, including the show, despite what happened. I don't want to strike sore spots here with people, but A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones, and your criticism of, and I will, you know, no big spoilers here because I think the world has watched the TV series by now, the HBO series. That I just want to say the character. One of the characters essentially gets stabbed in the abdomen multiple times, and you know, thrown in a ditch and survives, right? And you were and you were speaking of how that entirely robbed, you know, the story of tension, and the plot armor was just essentially ridiculous. And that, you know, I loved your commentary in that, you know, and I think we as authors, we don't like people to write our works for us, right? We make certain choices, you know, in terms of narrative, in terms of whether or not a character will survive or not, etc. You know, and I think ultimately that's up to us, and it's up to the reader to like it or not like our choices. However, there's an intent behind it when we do it. But I think what I loved about your analysis was that, yes, like, you know, okay, yes, that's the truth. However, right, there's some things that essentially defy logic, and that it becomes clear to your reader, your viewer, that it is essentially done for advancement of keeping this particular character alive, perhaps because you like them. Yeah. Because there's all kinds of commentary out there from the author about how much certain characters
fundamentally, like, a lot of good writing is about trying to keep the blinders on the reader, because, like, a reader goes into a story knowing that it's not real. They go into a story knowing that it is that this world does not exist, that these characters being alive or dead does not matter, and yet we go into the story because we want to feel things anyway. We want to be convinced of that. And so, like, you look at, like, the problem of exposition, right? And people talk about, like, the ways to also, people are talking about Prior of the Orange Tree in the chat. I just want everyone to know I'm currently reading that. I'm halfway through. But like, when you talk about exposition and, like, how to deliver it well, fundamentally the ways to solve that is to trick the reader into not realizing they're reading exposition. The moment that they kind of realize that this is being info dumped because the audience needs to know that the evil king is coming back and stuff like that, and and this particular sword is the only way to stop him, people sort of, like, get taken out of the book. When it comes to, like, tension and plot armor, it's not fundamentally the problem with plot armor is not fundamentally that, like, a character survives because the author wants them to. The problem with plot armor is that the reader realizes that the character is surviving because the author wants them to, and, like, thinking about that consciously. Because, like, when we read, when we read The Way of Kings or whatever, and we see Kaladin come out the other side, there's a small part of us which, like, knows that he was never going to die, right? But, like, if we consciously think about, like, if he survives by getting pulled out of the chasm by a chasm fiend that would never help him, and why would he? And also, he somehow just is perfectly fine with a fractured skull. We kind of go, okay, clearly the writer wrote themselves into a corner. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
Mm-hmm. As someone who's spent several years of my life being a teacher, it kind of seems similar to that, because especially if you're teaching
the kids, you don't want the kids to know they're learning.
Exactly. I didn't want to say kids because I didn't want to make people feel like they're kids when they're learning how to write. Like, that's not the connection I'm trying to make. What I'm trying to say is they shouldn't know that they're learning. No. Right? So
that's why you do fun exercises with, in primary school or whatever.
Exactly. You hit the flashcards with a hammer, and then it's a game, and then you're not learning, right? So you got to distract us readers, we have to be entertained. Yeah. We can't know. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is one of those things that once you notice it's happening, you're like, okay, now this is bothering me, right? So I think most of us readers have felt that moment. And something that's also interesting is, I've talked to a couple other guests about this, is what will pull you out of the story. So not necessarily that you realize they're info dumping, but what is a detail that will make you leave the narrative? So, and it depends on your subjective experience, right? So I think I had mentioned before, Wraithmarked. We talked about him before, and he was on the channel, the CEO of Wraithmarked, and he has an advanced degree that has to do with physiology. And so he says that for him, it's injuries will pull him out of story. If someone gets shot in the shoulder, right, Bryce will be like, yeah, nah, that's it, right? But if the character gets up, then that bothers him. I've mentioned from my perspective also, having lived in Japan for almost 10 years now, if there's a Japanese element to a story, and I don't feel that is true to the experience that I know, it'll pull me out, right? But as an author, you can't think about all these subjective realities, right, when you're writing a story. So I guess it's not necessarily a question, more of an observation, just that it seems that it's so individualized what might break through that narrative glow, for each person.
Well, everyone's going to have those things which they know a lot about, that are gonna take them out,
Yeah. Do you have any particular point for you that you read it and you're like, nope?
Yeah, that's what I'm interested to hear, Tim. What brings you out? You talked about the exposition. What brings you out of a story when you're?
I'm from New Zealand. No one writes about New Zealand. There's no one if you're writing about New Zealand, you're probably from New Zealand. And even though I do have a law degree, I moved on to this job before becoming a practicing lawyer. So it's not like I have an extensive knowledge of a courtroom in the same way. There are sometimes law things where I'm like, that does not make sense that I see with that. But honestly, for the most part, I thought sometimes with mental health and mental illness and like seeing how counselors and psychologists operate in stories, I'm like, this is just not how it works. That does happen because I have a bit of a background in that as well. Yeah, this is probably a little bit of that.
It's a very unique thing for all of us. I know, PL, yours is injuries as well, right? You and Bryce both had the same.
Yeah, that's one of them. But I think, you're right, Taylor. But I think for me, the biggest one is, and it's not a criticism of the writing per se, is if I feel the writing is somewhat flat in terms of, I want emotional depth. So if your best friend gets killed in a battle, okay, yeah, you may have a delayed reaction, but when it's just a shrug off, and then you move on, and then it's not mentioned at all, or it's not examined how the hero feels about that leaves me a bit cold, and that can definitely bring me out. And I also think what I'm looking for is, irrespective of the perspective from which you write, omniscient, first person, etc., I want to see essentially the other side, right? So you can write first person, but still write effectively in terms of the reaction, how the first person narrator sees the other character's reaction, how they perceive the other characters. I want the other side. And I think, like Tim, I'm not a lawyer, but in my current job, I'm something like, I guess, lay counsel. And I spend my days arguing, but always having to look for the other side to bolster my argument, to look for weaknesses in the other side's argument to bolster my argument. So I want to see that the richness of the other side and their perspective, no matter how you write your book. So, and I think if it's not there, that takes me out of a story.
You're not alone. There's comments here agreeing with you. Brushes over established emotional connections because the plot always takes me out of the story. This goes back to your thing, Tim, when you mentioned that, you kind of emphasize that emotional character connection over world building or plot, right? So it seems like a lot of readers also prioritize that, not just authors. So
yeah, I'm currently going through like a second draft of the story, and like one of the things that I ended up doing is moving more of the word building stuff to later in the book. So that's just like a structural thing, which you will see with a lot of fantasy and sci-fi books that I end up reviewing or whatever. I'll be like, there's so much stuff in these first 3 chapters which fundamentally I don't need to know right now. Yeah, which is why, by the way, Prior of the Orange Tree is a very strange book, because I kept on reading it, and I'm only halfway through, but like, it's a very classical fantasy book. Like it's genuinely, it's like good versus evil.
Yep.
I mean, I'm so trained into believing that the people you are told are evil are actually good. So obviously that's like a massive trope right now. In the book, the dragons are like, you're told the dragons are coming back and they're all evil, and I was totally expecting to have like, actually no, the dragons are misunderstood.
They're actually good.
Stuff like that. But then the dragon comes back and he's like, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill all of you, and also I am evil. I'm really evil. Like.
Yeah, there was actually a comment earlier. Forgive me for not pulling it up at the time, but I did read it, where someone said it's interesting seeing the dynamic between, in current times, the kind of grayness of all of the worlds. Having a pure evil character seems to be almost a lost art at this point. There was a comment earlier that mentioned that, and that's kind of go into your most recent video about Gandalf, right? You talk about the good and evil and how there is a space for that dichotomy and the gray area. It's all about how you handle it, right? I've
talked about how Tolkien's writings about good and evil, people often say that like Tolkien's writings are simple in the sense that like it's just good and evil, and complexity is exploring the difference between them. But the complexity of Tolkien's work, I mean, first off, there are some morally great characters, especially if you look outside of Lord of the Rings. Even within Lord of the Rings, you've got Boromir, Smeagol, Denethor. But outside of Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, Children of Húrin, there's all sorts of really interesting moral quandaries. But putting that aside, a lot of Tolkien's complexity does come in from how he tries to articulate the complex nature of good and evil. That tends to be where he likes to focus.
Right.
Yeah. And I think so much of Tolkien's morally gray characters are characters that believe that they're good, and that their evil is justified essentially for the greater good. There seems to be a lot of that in for me.
Yeah.
When I read Tolkien, that's the evil is done in the name of good, right? Or madness, one of the two predominantly. So.
So this next question that I have is kind of a throwback, but it does connect to the future, so bear with me for just a second. But I do know that you're open about the fact, I know this is not just an in-person comment, that you're open about the fact that you got your beginnings on Wattpad, right? And you have said, my crimes are in the open before, so...
No, well, what about Wattpad?
Yeah. So I think all of us have that early story that is completely derivative, that is wish fulfillment, that is something that is in a journal buried in a closet somewhere for most of us. Okay. But you, being the brave human that you are, put that out there, right? During the learning phase.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and to respond to the comment, no, not AO3. I've
AO3,
never been a fanfic person. I've never been a fanfic person. I don't read it. I don't write it. It just doesn't interest me. But okay, what is the story that's like? That's
no, it's not a. I'm sorry. No, it's not a particular story. No, so I'm just saying that act of being able to put those beginnings out there. Do you think that's translated now to having a thick enough skin to make the content that you do on YouTube, right? Because you got used to being perceived so early. And a lot of people have to get over this hump on YouTube of being perceived, right?
There are, oh my God.
People are loud on the internet. They just are.
There are layers of an answer to this question.
Okay.
So in some sense, I think I have thinner skin than I did when I started, which is a little bit weird to explain. But when I first started, so I grew up basically trying anything and everything. I was a very entrepreneurial kid. I tried to start a jewelry business by buying secondhand jewelry off like a random site I found and then reselling it privately. I made no money. I was like 14 or something. I tried to I did a lot of freelancing when I was really young, in all sorts of different little things. I just wanted to try things. I remember like trying to be a baker or something, inventing recipes. Wattpad was like sort of one of those things. I don't want to say that everything was like all about like making money or a career. For me, it was all about creative expression or like finding the ability to, in some way, shape, or form, express myself creatively and find a platform for that. So Wattpad was kind of that in a long chain of things, I suppose. When I first started YouTube, I was terrified of anyone hearing me, which is why if you go to my very, very first YouTube videos, you'll find that I tend to film in empty lecture theaters at university or when I'm walking around, because there would be no one in the park, there'd be no one in the university. And when I did film at home, no one would be around. I would wait for my parents at the time to go out. I would film, and I would freeze up if anyone came home. I eventually got over that slowly, and now I'm perfectly fine with recording myself and stuff like that. But I still hate recording. Recording is my least favorite part of the process. And I have actually ended up kind of shooting myself in the foot because I keep on putting off recording because I don't want to record myself. And then I end up delaying videos, and that's on me. So yeah, like there's still an element where I don't particularly enjoy being on being on camera, that sort of part. And in some sense, like being on YouTube, it is performance. There's always an element of performance to it, and performing is a thing that you're not always necessarily psychologically ready for. I mean, I am me on my channel. I'm not pretending to be anyone else, but you do have to have a certain tone. You've got to have a certain cadence. You've got to practice your lines. Like there are going to be paragraphs which I say, which I repeat 20 times trying to get it right.
Yep. I feel that in the soul.
Yeah. And
He's laughing at me. He knows.
Yeah, is one or more of those more or less authentic? I don't know. It's a bit complicated. But yeah, I mean, in some sense, I think I have thinner skin than I have in the past. But
I'd agree.
Hello again.
Recording sexy.
Yeah. It's my least favorite part of the process. I'm a writer at heart, and I get my editors to do the editing. So that's where my joy lies, really. But yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I think that if you're wanting to do YouTube, getting over that part is kind of just necessary for the most part. Yeah,
there is the recording aspect, and then there is the reaction aspect afterwards, right? So I actually just recently had a talk with one of my good booktube friends who released a reading vlog about the Hunger Games. What year is it? Lord knows. But she released it, and people had thoughts, in the comments, and she was just kind of working through that feedback, not saying that those shouldn't have been there, but that is the other part of content creation, right? So you've done the sucky part of recording, which I feel as well intimately, you kind of have to build yourself up to it. You've done that, you've edited, you get it out, and then there's the response. And sometimes that does require a thick skin as well, depending on what you're talking about. So
yeah, the few times that I have, that's a whole other topic. I've not ever really had to face that much like online backlash. There's only really been like one part where I got a bit of backlash, and that was strange to deal with. But for the most part, it's I want to just create a place where people can be creative and can feel excited about storytelling, and that it's a positive place for storytelling, because I do have the occasional video where I deconstruct why something didn't work. But for the most part, you look at my writing and word building videos and it's talking about good examples. And I think that is an undersold area on YouTube at the moment. There's a big market for just trashing everything all the time. And I think it means more when you're talking about how great things are that you take the time to deconstruct why something maybe doesn't work, than if you have an incentive to just say everything's terrible all the time, because of course it is.
That's one thing I think we love about your videos, Tim. We love the subjectivity, but we also love the overall positivity. That's how it's conveyed, rather than, we all know for the clickbait. Yeah, anytime you put up a video about why I hated this or why I hated that, for most booktubers, it's going to get twice the views that it would if you didn't. But yeah, we respect people who don't succumb to the temptation to do that just to get more views. So respect that.
That's tempting.
Well, I think it's also, if you have a real reason, it's different. It's the same thing with a written review. If you have a real reason, as someone, I don't get too much backlash, but I did publicly dislike a Ghibli movie once, and that the Boy and the Heron. So it's based on.
It is his most. It is the film which he takes the most effort to really understand.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. But for me, to be completely transparent, I saw it in Japan, and the name is the same as this classic here, How Do You Live? So Kimi Tachi wa Doikika has the same name. And this is one of my favorite books of all time. So full transparency.
Really? You're one of the people that's actually read that book?
I read
Like,
it before the movie, and then I heard the movie was coming out, and I lost my
never heard
mind.
about
I was so excited.
It's nothing like the book. It's nothing like the book.
No, and Ghibli knows that people are going to go watch what they put out anyway. So their marketing strategy here was just they released a poster with Kimitachi wa Doikiru and the heron kind of motif, and they did nothing else. And so, of course, everyone thinks it's an adaptation in some way, shape, or form. And then I'm excited. I go with my husband, we go to watch it, and I'm like, the hell is this?
It's an ideological adaptation, you know. It adapts the themes, I think.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't get the story.
I can give you that. And it is a visual and audio delight.
For the record, it's fair that you didn't like it. I put out a video on it where I was kind of like, it's kind of difficult to decipher, and I think that's not. It's kind of like it's you know what it is? It's kind of like Christopher Nolan's Tenet, which is that it's the most. You know, Tenet is the most Nolan film.
Yeah,
to the point that it's possibly too much Nolan and makes it undecipherable. Potentially The Boy and the Heron is that forgivable.
Well, I also feel like there's also Miyazaki. He's just gonna make what he wants to make. He doesn't care how people receive it at this point. And props to him for that. So I would love to have an in-depth conversation actually about it with you, because I think that there are things to like about it, and I think my disappointment colored it a lot because of my expectations going in. So.
Yeah. But it's funny when you mention Nolan, and of course I haven't seen anything Ghibli or anything Ghibli, but I'm a big Nolan fan. And you look at something like Inception versus Tenet, right? Yeah. And you look at
the tightest film.
Yes, I would agree. Inception is this most tightly plotted, but yet having the nuance and the depth.
Most ratio.
Yeah, exactly. But that gets me on quickly. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole about adaptations, but I don't know what it's like, the fan base and things like manga, because I don't read it. I don't read manga, but I know that in general, when it comes to adaptations from particularly fiction, a lot of fans I want a faithful adaptation. And if it's not what I consider faithful adaptation, then I don't like it.
I have so many thoughts on this. That is a whole other discussion. We can go into that if you want, but
let's go a little bit down that path.
Yeah, versus the people that as you said, sorry Tim, I'm fine with the thematical adaptation. Like Taylor said, it's true to the concept, but it's not really true to the actual.
I am someone who likes faithful adaptations. I am a full-blooded, I like faithful adaptations person. When I read a book and I get that there's a movie coming out, I want to see the things that I liked in the book in the movie. That is how I want to do it. I want to share this thing that I loved with more people, and more people are going to go watch that film. So that is absolutely that. At the same time, I have to remind myself that that really big desire for faithful adaptation is in part it's very much empowered by the modern internet, and we have to remind ourselves of things like Blade Runner, one of the greatest films ever made, completely different to the book, and it's a classic book. It is a well-loved classic book. It is very, very different. And there are some changes which you need to make for the screen. I would consider the Lord of the Rings films incredibly faithful adaptations, but they also omitted a whole bunch of stuff, which I am broadly supportive of. Yeah, it's complicated.
Well, I think it's
where's Imrahil Abdullah Amra? Where's Imrahil? I wanted Imrahil, and he wasn't there. In the Peter Jackson, I love the Peter Jackson adaptation.
Imrahil could have been there.
Yeah, sorry, I digress.
Well, I think it's something that you can be self-aware, something that you wanted to see, but it isn't necessarily key to the story, right? So as long as it keeps the heart of it, right? So we always seem to come back to Lord of the Rings, but it is the quintessential example here of, I think.
Well, you take like Castlevania, which is an adaptation of the game, but it's like arguably better than the game, like it's like it's so clearly an adaptation of like all the things people kind of loved about the game, but like on a different scale, and like enriched by the new medium. faithfulness. But then there's things like fairy tales. I do not care about faithful renditions of fairy tales. It's just like it does not bother me because like these or Shakespeare people. This is the thing. This is what I tend. This is what I tend to ask when people like go, no. We need to have like really faithful Disney films, and I'm like, well, but hang on. Like, are you fine with Shakespeare being constantly reimagined?
Right.
And they tend to be like, yeah, because I mean, there's been a rendition of every single kind of Shakespeare play in like they've reimagined it as World War I things, or as everyone is a woman, or whatever, and like people are fine with that because it's Shakespeare. Shakespeare's had and continues to have huge amounts of really faithful adaptations and wild adaptations and really symbolic adaptations that challenge things. That's part of the culture. With fairy tales, it feels exactly the same to me.
Yeah.
Fairy tales like constantly are reimagined with and so on. And I mean, like, Snow White and the Huntsman came out 10 years ago. Like, does it matter that it wasn't faithful?
Yeah.
I don't care, Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that that's a rabbit hole. Might have to go down a themed topic in the future. But I do want to, you've been so generous with your time so far, and we are coming up, on almost an hour and a half. So we did reach out to your audience to get a couple questions, and I've also seen some questions in the chat that I jotted down. So if you don't mind, I'll throw a couple of those at you.
Sure.
And see how that goes. So I did see a super chat in the comments. So thank you so much. I'm sorry it took so long to get to it, but I appreciate this immensely. So the question is, for world building, if humans invade alien planets. So I guess maybe some world building starting points or elements that you could include for if humans invade aliens?
Okay, so the first thing that can make humans invading alien planets really interesting is imagine the people who want the invasion. What do they look like? Who is supporting the invasion from the start? So like start with like the most contradictory element of the world building and see what grows from there. I don't know. That seems to be what's come to mind.
Okay, why a big turn here? Quick left here, different topic. But how is the world tour going? Is it over? Is it over? I've lost track. That is something I did want to ask you because you're always somewhere.
I am always somewhere. So, for people who don't know, I am moving around Europe for 2 years with my wife. This was something that we planned for a long time. And basically, each month or so, we move city or country or something like that. At the moment, I am house sitting, so free accommodation, as in Scotland somewhere. And so we take care of people's pets, and then we get to live at their house, and that's the advantage of kind of being able to work remotely. It is not over. I've still got another year. Basically, we go home December, and if I'll be stopping by Seattle for Worldcon, so if you want to come say hi to me, come to Worldcon in Seattle this year. It's in September or something, and it'll be a long. We've still got a lot more to do, but it's a lot of fun, and I'm really privileged that I get to do it.
That sounds like a dream as someone who's a lifelong traveler. Sounds fantastic. Do you have a favorite meal that you've had thus far on this tour? Anything that stuck out to you, food-wise?
Oh, so it's important to note that I haven't been to Spain or Italy or we've barely done Greece. So those are like 3 food places that all people's place. The French pastries. So when we were in France, they very commonly would have pastries. Like, for example, they have these tarts which have like cream and strawberries, which are just
winning combo,
amazing. There's the cognon, which is like a caramelized pastry in Brittany, which is like basically just like, imagine a scrolled pastry with like a really dense amount of caramel, like caramelized on the bottom. It is amazing. That has been really, really nice. French was France. French pastries were probably the standout.
Mm.
There was a pie in York which we have driven to twice to get access to. That was very, very nice. But New Zealand pies are better. So,
ooh, shots fired.
oh yeah, I mean I've got to say, fish and chips over in the UK, for all they're famous for it, nowhere near as good as New Zealand. My goodness.
I don't have much to compare to, but I must say, when I was in London on my way to Glasgow, I was like, is this the thing that is? Am I eating the thing that I've heard about? You know?
Yeah, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
As someone, you know, who pretentiously lived in Italy, I do think that some of those food will jump up that list that you made. But strawberries and cream, can't beat that. So thank you for that. So I was looking to see if I saw any more specifically, this is a question for you things, and I'll still glance through, but I do have some from your Instagram that you had sent over to me. So some from your direct audience. I think a good one to throw out for you would be because we talked about this a little bit earlier, the idea of death and like the thing that comes next was best resurrections.
Palpatine. It's just fantastic. You know, somehow he returned. It adds in mystery. It adds in, you know, like it's immediately best resurrections. Oh my goodness. Doctor Who has some good ones. Doctor Who has some interesting resurrections. I think Captain Jack's resurrection is quite. He has many resurrections, but like the way that they play with resurrection and that is quite good, especially in Torchwood. He's like buried for like 300 years, choking on like dirt for like 300 years before he gets out and like forgives his brother. It's very, very good. Yeah, best resurrection. I'm sure there's going to be a reresurrection that I've forgotten that I will be like, oh, that one probably.
Well, just a disclaimer on your behalf. Tim doesn't know these questions in advance. All right, so everything is on the spot while y'all are asking him. So on his behalf. Another one here that kind of delves into some of the deeper topics we were talking about earlier, which someone said fantasy as therapy, right? So we talked about the unique ability of fantasy, and I think we can include sci-fi here as well, to be a mirror kind of for us to look at without feeling like we're looking directly at ourselves, right? So we can work through grief. We can work through something that might not be possible for us in our real life, right? I think that there's a beauty to fiction in that way. So
very much so.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the idea of fantasy or sci-fi as therapy? Or
almost everything I write is in some way me processing something. Basically, I don't tend to write a story unless there's something that I am thinking about a lot. In part, Raya writes a lot about, like I describe a Catalogue for the Humanities, a collection about death, endings, and finding hope somewhere in between, is because I think a lot about how everything I've ever done is going to end, and one day I'm going to die, and that kind of terrifies me a little bit. And so a lot of the stories about handling that feeling in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I tend to write a lot about that sort of thing. I think that's very good. In fact, I think that games in particular have a lot of really interesting capacity to be therapy specifically, just because of the personal engagement element.
Yeah, that is something that we haven't touched on yet, is the idea of stories in different mediums, right? So you've got, the visual medium specifically, right, with movies, with film, with TV shows. Then you've got more interactive when it comes to video games, very overlooked medium, I think, for storytelling. You've got the books that we all love, right? So I think the way that the medium that a story comes in really can change the way that you interact with it. So it's
very much so.
Yeah, from you.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is one that just intrigued me, and I think you might have seen this one ahead of time, but someone just said frogs. Is that an
The blue
inside
poison dart frog. The blue poison dart frog, okay? It's a great frog. It is gorgeous. It's this neon like blue frog. It looks great. It looks like it's almost glowing. It's just cool. I love it. It's beautiful. Easy
And
answer.
that's how you
Everyone
know.
put your favorite frog in the chat.
That's how you know someone's a YouTuber and used to being behind the camera, if they can just wax poetic about frogs randomly. I love it. So we'll do one or two more, and then we'll cut this section off. And the next one that catches my eye is women sci-fi writers. So any that you would shout out on your mind recently?
So I've read a little bit of Becky Chambers recently. She's Psalm for the Wild Built, and I just bought. What was the other book? She's got another book that I literally just bought.
Is it why am I blanking on the name too? It's one of the first in her series, right? Her like space opera series. Oh my gosh. I'm blanking too. Do we read? Okay.
It's fine. Becky Chambers I've read a little bit of. I mean, I could go, Octavia Butler and Ursula Le Guin and Mary Shelley and so on. But like those are all obviously classics for a reason. I've really enjoyed some of Samantha Harvey's work. And she wrote Orbital. It's not necessarily sci-fi, but it is about astronauts in space. I really like Rula Ratnakar's work. I've referenced her stuff on the channel a few times. It's lots of really amazing women in the sci-fi space. I actually need to read more of like Martha Wells. I've not been that exposed, although everyone seems to talk about Martha Wells a lot, but I've not been as exposed to her.
Yeah, I got again, I'm blanking on names. I read the first 3 novellas in her series. Oh my god, the robot one. the sassy robot one, Martha Wells made one.
Murderbot.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I read the first 3 novellas. Fantastic. So I'm seeing some in the chat as well. So if the person that asked this from Instagram is here, look in the chat.
Lots of good suggestions.
Some good ones here. Thank you,
Elizabeth
chat.
Bonesteel. That's definitely a stage name. That is.
If that is real, I would engrave everything with my name. Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone in the chat for putting those in there. Okay, so again, you've been so generous with your time, and we really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. It's been fantastic.
Like I said, you do so much. It's so hard to kind of gather it all into one. Maybe there'll be a part 2 or something at some point. You never know, but
maybe we can make that.
Yes, please, part 2. Yes.
Rubbing his hands together. So before we head out, I always like to let our guests do a little sign off. So again, if people live under a rock, if they're joining halfway through this chat and they don't know who you are, could you tell people where to find you? Anything that you want to leave people with?
If you want to watch more of my stuff, go check out Hello Future Me on YouTube. And there's links and stuff to my books and my writings, all that sort of stuff. I think that's mostly it. It's been great. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. And for everyone watching, links are in the description down below to Tim's link tree, as well as where you can get all of his books and his channel, all available in the description. And I would also like to hand it off to PL as well. Can you tell people where to find you, my wonderful co-host?
Well, thank you so much. And thanks again, Tim. So awesome to have you. Yeah, quickly, plstore.com, the books. You can just find me beside Taylor on Page Chewing, her channel and mine for 6 Elementals interviews, where I focus more on indie authors. Before I Go blog, where Taylor and I are both assistant editors for reviews, and I think that's about it.
Yep. So if you're new here, you're here for Tim. So thank you for joining us. My name is Taylor. My channel is Made Between the Pages. I do a bunch of book stuff. I talk about my life in Japan. I do vlogs as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag of things, but you can always find me next to PL doing page chewing. We get to talk to so many wonderful creatives across the space, authors, content creators, you name it. We've talked to publishers. It's just, it's something that brings us a lot of joy. And the people in the comments are the people who really make it what it is. So again, thank you for being here. I see some comments of everyone saying, that they enjoyed it, and that just makes us delighted. So, but for today, we're going to head out. So thank you everyone for being here, and we will see you in the next episode.